My lords, many empires make poor decisions. Some settle holy worlds that they really should have left alone. Some let in way too many refugees and suffer the consequences. Today I'm going to discuss empires who make bad choices, or maybe just suffered the brutal whims of the galaxy. We'll start with planetary rebellions, as this is perhaps one of the simplest ways that empires can destroy themselves, and it's entirely the fault of the government. A colony, of course, doesn't decide to just revolt overnight. It takes approximately a year of poor management or neglect. Specifically, if a planet has at least 10 pop units, and the stability drops below 25% for a year, the troubles will begin. Of course, not all colonies are equal. This won't occur if the planet has been conquered within the last 3 years, if they've already tried and failed to revolt for the last 15 years, or if the planet is actively being bombed or invaded. Furthermore, slavery rebellions, it's worth noting, are a bit looser. You only need 5 population units of slaves to be under 40% happiness and a slave revolt can begin, although that is a separate topic entirely. Fortunately, however, there are several options available to you should you find yourself in a planetary revolt. The worst option is simply to do nothing, to twiddle your thumbs and hope for the best. If you do this, the situation will continue to spiral out of control and you'll be heading for a full-blown system-wide planetary revolt. This will result in a bad time. The other 2 measures are distributing amenities. Essentially, this gives the people cool stuff to play with, which may also include drugs and alcohol, therefore quelling whatever they're annoyed about. This will cost you consumer goods monthly. The final measure is to institute a crackdown. This is exactly what it sounds like, increasing build speed for strongholds and soldiers increasing stability at the cost of paying them more money. Different influences will make the situation better or worse. So, for example, if the colony has unemployed populations, more pops in general. If anyone on the colony is currently being assimilated or purged, this is all bad. If other empires support the revolt, which we'll touch on later, this is also bad. And if other nearby colonies are also going down the revolt situation, this makes it even worse. It becomes a sort of chain reaction, if you like, where they all support each other. Generally, the ways to fix this is increasing the army garrison strength on the planet, the system's starbase being a bastion or a citadel, and you can also affect the increase or decrease by resettling your population that lives on the planet, but I'll touch on that later. The revolt will move through 4 stages. Each stage makes the planet 10% less stable than it already was. At stage 2, you'll find that the population will start to pick different political ideologies from the one your empire belongs to. If it's a slave revolt, a significant planetary devastation will also occur. By the time you get to stage 3, the issue really begins to ramp up. The revolt will begin spreading to any nearby planet within 6 jumps of said planet, as long as those planets have at least 20% of the total population being the same as the revolting world. At stage 4, the rebels will ask nearby empires for assistance, and nearby empires can accept or decline. If they accept, then that nearby empire is basically planning to annex the planet away from us. If the situation reaches the end, the revolting colony that started the rebellion will form a new empire, take control of the star system, as well as every system that has a colony with the spreading turbulence modifier, and is less than 35 stability. All neighbouring systems owned by the original empire without a colony, or bastion starbases, will also be transferred. Finally, any system owned by the original empire which borders 2 or more of the revolting empire's system is also transferred unless it has a colony or a bastion starbase. The original empire will gain claims on all of the lost systems, and any fleets it has in those systems go MIA. If no empire supported the revolt, the revolting empire will gain a large amount of resource and a fleet equal to 80% of its naval capacity. This is a fantastic example of how these rebellions can get out of hand so quickly. The original empire can decide to start a war as the defender or set a truce with the revolting empire. If an empire supported the revolt, then it will annex the revolting empire. If the original empire isn't already at war with them, then they can choose to go to war over this as the defender or set a truce with the supporting empire. This event can certainly and quite literally break your empire in 2. Should you find yourself in this situation whereby your subjects are rebelling, I strongly recommend you deal with the situation as soon as possible, either via the distribution of amenities or the crackdown. I've also personally found that resettlement works a treat. Move loyal, well-mannered citizens onto the planet and spread the dissidents throughout your empire. They will integrate eventually. A final note on this is regarding refugees. We have seen many times empires with open refugee policies being swamped by fleeing citizens of other empires during galactic wars. This often occurs if an empire falls to a genocidal empire like a devouring swarm and its people are fleeing from being eaten. I urge you to be extremely careful here, as it is all too common to see well-organised, maintained planets get overwhelmed by new arrivals. Often these new arrivals have different ethics, you'll see unemployment spikes, happiness penalties follow, and rebellions can follow that. Be very careful of that indeed. Of course, my lords, I should caveat all of that with refugees aren't always bad. An appropriate amount can absolutely be a boon to your economy. It's only when you begin to get more than your planets and systems can necessarily cope with. In a similar vein, we have the AI rebellion. Unlike the general rebellion, this occurs when one is not allowing citizen rights to sentient machines. Assuming a default galaxy, 10 years prior to midgame, if the empire is organic, holds 75 machine unit pops with it, or 25% of their empire is mechanical, and of course the robots have the appropriate sentient technologies but are not given citizen rights, then the AI rebellion can occur. This will begin with the computational overclocking event. Essentially, your scientists will report a recent unexpected rise in CPU clock cycles in several of your research-dedicated supercomputer clusters. But oddly, attempts at reducing the clock cycle frequency will prove unsuccessful. It will be reported that this will increase research capabilities at the cost of increased energy, and you'll be given the option to take advantage of this, or state that you cannot risk a hardware malfunction and will attempt to fix the problem. This is essentially the start of the AI uprising, when the machines begin to awaken, so to speak. Many different events can occur in this situation. You may find AIs commit suicide or kill their overlords. You may find AIs question whether or not they have a soul. Depending on how you react to these events will affect the situation. There is a so-called cruelty scale, whereby when you are more cruel to the machines that you're enslaving, the situation will speed up, or if you're nicer to them, the situation will slow down. Eventually, should you continue to push your research capabilities to the max and not deal with the situation, the AI uprising will occur. In a similar vein to how a regular uprising works, a machine empire will be created which takes control from 25 to 75% of the creator empire's systems. This will depend on the mechanical population within said empire. It's worth noting that the machine empire can become a driven assimilator or a determined exterminator, and this will somewhat depend on your cruelty score, depending on how awful you were to the machines that you were enslaving. Just like a regular rebellion, they'll receive a huge amount of resource and fleets that will use 80% of its naval capacity, or if it's a determined exterminator, they will use 150% of their naval capacity. This can be extremely dangerous. Uniquely, however, when the rebellion occurs, you're given an option. You can either continue to play as the Empire, who you were playing as, or you can choose to play as the AI rebellion and destroy the organics who enslaved you so. Of course, regardless of your options, your empire is split in two, and this certainly represents a poor decision for the organic empire indeed. Now we move on to the Kaleidoscope, which is very much an event in the theme that the galaxy has decided you need testing. However, how you deal with it will affect the outcome. Post mid-game, a random empire whose capital does not have a planetary shield generator will receive the planetary modifier Global Power Outage. If you look into the skies, you will see that they are filled with a bright, beautiful light that stretches across the entire system. This is the Kaleidoscope. A special project will occur, requiring a construction ship that will cause you to investigate this global power outage. When you do this, you will realize that this bright light across your system is actually an entity, and you can choose to feed it, don't feed it, or overfeed it. While the situation is active, there are a number of random events that can occur. The likelihood of negative versus positive events is affected by the current mood, and its mood is shifted by feeding it, not feeding it, or overfeeding it. Essentially, this creature wants to be fed. You'll also find that the Kaleidoscope's visual appearance will change based on its mood. Overfeeding it is definitely a good way of increasing its mood. When the situation ends, two things can happen, and the chance of each thing happening will drastically depend on its mood when the situation ends. You can either have a booming kaleidoscope or an exploding kaleidoscope. You're looking for the blooming kaleidoscope option, as this will provide you with the vacuum flower relic, which is a wonderful relic indeed. The vacuum flower will increase your monthly energy output by a whopping 10% and will also, depending on your capital system star, provide resources. It is wonderful indeed, as it can even give dark matter or living metal or even Zro. It's wonderful. As I mentioned, you're looking for blooming kaleidoscope, which has a 10% base chance, but will increase the more you overfeed it, all the way up to, I believe, 90%. Next, my lords, onto an entirely self-inflicted event, we have bankruptcy. Bankruptcies, also known as shortages, are situations that can happen when an empire's stored stockpile for any particular resource, be it energy, minerals, food, alloys, etc., drops to zero with a negative income. Shortages will progress as long as the empire has a negative income and will only recede once a positive income is reached, or the stockpile is raised above zero some other way, like buying from the market. As an example, you could have a minus 200 alloy deficit, but as long as you're buying, say, 1,000 minerals a month, well then that's no problem. Unlike other situations, the aim is to prevent the situation from making progress to avoid empire penalties. The shortages can be dealt with one of two ways. You can maintain current expenditures, which means the bankruptcy will increase in volatility, or you can attempt to deal with it by alleviating the situation. This will depend on what you're short of. For example, if you're short of energy, you can cut scientific investment. This will reduce researcher output, but also reduce building upkeep by 20%. This could be the thing that pushes you back into the green. Not managing your economy properly can result in one or more of these shortages, and it's not uncommon for one shortage to lead to another shortage. What you will also find as you progress through the stages is that more negative effects will begin to snowball. There are four: minor deficit, major deficit, severe, and catastrophic. Using energy again as an example, being in a deficit will reduce your diplomatic weight, reduce your research, reduce mechanical pop speed assembly, combat disengagement chance, ship weapon damage, sublight speed, and catastrophic will reduce resources from jobs. They can be extremely dangerous to an empire. However, one of the worst things that can happen, of course empire depending, is if the empire defaults. This is where the situation progresses all the way to the final stage. Now, the empire will receive a large amount of resource based on how many decades have passed, and ultimately will end all current shortage situations. However, all upgraded buildings, except your capital building, will be downgraded to the lowest possible tier. All offensive armies and half of your empire's military ships are disbanded. In addition, your empire will gain the Empire Defaulted modifier for 10 years, which will increase all costs by 25%, decrease your influence and unity by 50%, and your ship weapon damage by 25%. It is quite the drastic event. Now, in the past, some empires may have attempted to use this to their benefit. Whether or not that's still possible, I'm not entirely sure, but that would be a very risky strategy indeed. I certainly would not recommend it, and in any case, if you find yourself in a shortage situation, it's probably because you made a mistake along the way. Continuing the theme of really dumb things that governments can do, we do know of one empire who thought it would be a good idea to dismantle the ancient cloning vats, keeping them alive. Yes, this was a clone empire, they needed the cloning vats to survive, and guess what happened? They all died, trying to rebuild them. Really, really smart. But finally, my lords, we have the demonic incursion, which in fairness is somewhat outside of your control, but it will absolutely tear your empire apart. A number of special things have to happen. First, you have to be playing as Knights of the Toxic God, one of the best and certainly more narratively exciting origins in the game. You will also need to find the Doorway event. Now, the Doorway event has multiple different outcomes, but one, my lords, is where you find the Dimension of Suffering. Now this dimension leads to a realm which is opposed to the sapient mind on a fundamental level. Any and all contact with this dimension will cause intense suffering, which if continued for more than a few minutes will lead to intense suicidal urges coupled with attempts to mutilate sensory organs. Even simply studying data from this dimension will lead to intense discomfort. What Knights of the Toxic God can choose to do, and this is where the choice comes in, is to send in your best knight. Now, there is a 15% chance nothing happens, but there is a 25% chance the Dark Knight will occur. This is when the knight who you sent into the portal returns twisted and darkened. They lead a host of horrors through the portal and assault your colony. Survivors will report hearing him erupt in demonic cackle, claiming they will conquer our dimension. And this is where the demonic incursion will occur. Possessed by this dimensional being and now titling themselves as Lord Purifier, this knight will call upon the demonic forces to begin conquest of our galaxy. You will find additional portals will open briefly in the system, and through which an empire will emerge. The demonic incursion will spawn a unique empire with the Fanatic Purifier and Scavenger civics. They'll have high resources, a powerful fleet, and a level 5 Chosen One leader. They will be extremely powerful indeed. Most interestingly though, the player gets another choice. You can choose to attempt to defeat these invaders, or you can choose to play as the demonic incursion. Regardless which one of these options you choose, your original empire will no doubt suffer the consequences. And that brings this report to a close, my lords, but did I miss anything? Is there any terrible decisions that you think you've made that put your empire in a bad state? By all means, please let me know.